Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I hope you're having a fantastic day. We're back with a commenter edition of the top ways, accidentally or otherwise, you've been making Elden Ring harder for yourself. And we'll dive straight into number one, not exploring, and just racing through the area to the end, following the main objectives and ignoring everything else. I know this can be exceptionally prominent in the later game areas when the enemies are getting very hard and you just want to get through and get to the boss so you can get out of the area and hopefully go somewhere less stressful. So I'm using the mountaintops of the giants here as an example. It hurt my soul skipping all of the things I know I'm missing, hours and hours of content, lots of incredibly amazing loot. Just legging it through the area directly towards the fire giant. And this was me in previous Souls games before I got more comfortable with the combat and more familiar with the mechanics. So yeah, don't do this, please. You will only detriment yourself in the long run. Now we will move into number 2, locking yourself out of quest lines. On the previous video where I talked about my top things that you accidentally do to make Elden Ring harder, I did cover killing NPCs, but a fair few people called out more specifically unintentionally locking yourself out of NPC questlines. There are many parts in the game where you could accidentally miss a trigger for an NPC, and you then physically cannot interact with that NPC for the whole entire rest of the game. During the playthrough that I used for the Things You Missed series, I somehow managed to lock myself out of Rani's questline, which was agonizing for me, because I know just how juicy some of the rewards in that questline are. And there are many ways, many culprits, if you don't know the game like the back of your hand, that you can accidentally lock yourself out of these questlines. I totally get the want for an unspoiled playthrough, but the only thing I can suggest to combat this one is look up guides to make sure that you're not missing anything or not accidentally doing something wrong. I know for me, I like to go through the first playthrough at my leisure, so be it if I miss anything. I don't want to be spoiled at all. And then on the second playthrough, that's when I'll then research, see what I've missed, and fully complete every single thing in the game. So now we'll go on to the third one. Wielding equipment that you never use, specifically shields. As you can see here, I'm wearing my favourite armour set in the game. I've got Hoslow's armour set on, I've got my pulley bow, I've got my finger seal, and I've got my Star Scourge greatsword, so I'm fully kitted out for every situation. But I'm newer to the game, so I still feel quite exposed, and I have the stats required to wield the Golden Great Shield. This thing is going to be an absolute beast. It is going to protect me in all situations. And I've even got the Great Jar's Arsenal talisman to vastly increase my equip load, so I shouldn't have any problems with my equip load, right? I've even got 38 endurance. However, I have still gone over my limit, and my equip load has tipped over into heavy, and I am now slow rolling. Yeah, I could just remove a piece of armor or put on a slightly lighter armor set to combat this. But the whole point is players who do this are players that are particularly scared about the amount of damage you take in Souls-like games. And you want to be as tanky as possible, even at the detriment of your movement speed. Now, some players legitimately will use sword and board. They'll use a big sword and a big shield, and they will tailor their build to that. But a lot of people called out in the comments that it's a bad habit that they've all gotten into, wielding a shield, but then two-handing their weapon and never even using the shield, which slows you down and is nothing but a hindrance. So unless you are using that shield, and unless you have tailored your build to it to make sure you're still quick on your feet, take it off. You do not need it. You will be okay. Now on to number 4, not using summons and spirit ashes. This is definitely going to be the most hotly debated one of the video, and a little bit controversial, especially when we're talking about summons. I personally don't hugely agree with summons, unless you're talking about NPC summons, because I love them from a lore perspective. I think they're really cool. I never use player summons, because I then feel like I've cheated myself kind of thing. Like how much of that boss dying was me, and how much of it was because I have just summoned in an absolute Giga Chad who has just wrecked his face for me. Spirit Ashes, however, I can get on board with. I think they're a nice medium. And yes, I know some of you are going to say, hang on, a plus 10 Black Knife Tish or a plus 10 Mimic tier are way stronger than most of the players that I summon in my playthrough. Yes, true, but they're still NPCs at the end of the day. They still sometimes have dumb AI, and you know they're not going to be sweaty, min-maxed, let me solo her type players that are just going to absolutely trivialize the boss and take away that feeling of challenge and triumph for you. But that's not to say that I judge anyone no matter what you do. If you want to put yourself under them restraints and never use summons or spirit ashes, that's fine. You have way more mental fortitude than I do. And the other way, if you do feel like you need summons, there's no shame in it. If it is physically the only way you can complete the game, then do it, because everyone deserves to enjoy and experience this game, no matter how they manage to achieve that. So yeah, that was just personal preference, but again, this is a big one that came up in the comments, and I can see why. Now we'll go on to number 5, not utilizing jumping attacks. You will see straight away as I flash up my build, one of my 4 talisman slots is pretty much always used up by the Claw Talisman. I adore jumping attacks. I never don't use jumping attacks. So let me try and take out this first omen with normal attacks. This is a bit of a bad example because I'm using a massive plus 10 sword, so he does get staggered. But the point is, the fight is still a little bit touch and go, and just using normal R1s, he doesn't get staggered anywhere near as much as you're about to see for the next few fights coming up. Jumping attacks have an absolutely crazy increase to stagger. And as I say, you can combine it with the Claw Talisman and the Stone Barb Cracked Tear in your mixed physic. The Claw Talisman increases the damage output of jump attacks from all your weapons by 15%, and the Stone Barbed Cracked Tear means you do 30% more stance damage as well. So the two combined, along with making sure you're actually utilizing your jump attacks, you can stagger many bosses, not just enemies, but bosses, in 2 to 4 hits. And the more enemies are being staggered, the less they're attacking you, meaning the less damage you're taking, and the more it increases your survivability. Long story short, offense really is the best defense. Next, we'll move on to number 6, getting a hug from Fia. I'm sure we all took Fia up on the offer to have a cuddle. Who doesn't need a cuddle every now and then? And doing so also allows you to progress her questline, which is one of the juicier ones, and actually is the only way to get one of the Remembrances and slay the legendary dragon, Lich Dragon Fortisax. However, in doing so, you receive a minus 5% health debuff at the same time that you're given Baldachin's Blessing. Using this blessing will temporarily increase your poise for a small amount of FP, which is arguably quite a powerful item. But is acquiring this item worth the 5% health debuff you get? That is up for debate and completely personal preference and down to you. However, it's very, very easy to remove this health debuff. When you use the blessing, once its effects expire, so do the health debuff. You'll see here the exact second when it wears off and I get my health back. The reason I rest before doing this is because I could have sworn that resting is what removed it, but in actual fact, it's when the blessing wears off that you regain your health. Also, you can hug her multiple times and the health debuff won't continue to stack. It will remain at minus 5%. Now we will move into the 7th and final one, and that is not making the most out of your physic and pots. I already covered some of what I'm going to talk about during the previous part of this video series, but people called out more specifically going in depth with the crystal tears that you can use in your Flask of Wondrous Physic. It's very easy to get stuck into using the same old ones. If you're a mage, just using the one that means that all spells are free for a period of time, or if you're a melee build, using the one that restores half your health and maybe increases your strength or your dex. But there are so many incredibly awesome tiers that you can collect that go very underutilized. I already talked about one of them earlier with increasing your stance damage, and I strongly suggest you have a look through them yourself and try out a few combinations that you haven't attempted before. And then finally, we'll move on to pots, and I'm talking about cracked pots, ritual pots, and perfume bottles. Obviously, as I say, I talked about items in the previous video, but people called out more specifically just underutilizing the plethora of items that you can potentially craft. You'll see here me looking at a few of these awesome items. The Acid Spray Mist and the Iron Jar Aromatic. Never used either of them. Both sound amazing. The Cursed Blood Pot, the Swarm Pot, the Rot Pot. And I've just stumbled upon the Bewitching Branch as well, which I have heard people talk about time and time again. Uses FP to charm an enemy. That sounds like that could absolutely trivialize certain areas in the game. And it sounds incredibly fun to use. So, what I'm saying is make sure you take your time to go through the item crafting and try out a few of these more unique, nifty items. Hopefully, with my previous 5 and these 7 things, now you know a lot of things that you've been accidentally doing in Elden Ring to make it harder for yourself, and this will make your next journey in the Lands Between that much more manageable. And with that, all I have left to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.